Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, breaking news as Indian jets bomb Pakistani territory. News is coming in thick and fast as the two nations move to the brink of war. We'll have more on that in a moment as the news comes in. Meanwhile, in Canada, Mark Carney meets Donald Trump. Are sparks going to fly or are they going to kiss and make up? And tomorrow is VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. 80 years after the Allies defeated Germany and Japan in the Second World War. Well, in that war, as in so many other conflicts, Sikh soldiers stood out for their heroism, sacrifice and incredible deeds. And we'll take a look at where Sikhs fought, the incredible contribution they made to the global effort to defeat fascism and why their sacrifice should never be forgotten. Well, all this and more on today's show. But joining me, as always, for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. Just remember to leave your comments and interact with us so you can be a part of our show. Other than that, I'll send it back to you, Angus, because we've got a lot to cover tonight.
Indeed we do, and James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the news affecting the Sikh community across the world, and if we have time at the end we'll cover some of your comments which have been pouring in, so thank you to our wonderful audience for those. Right, James, let's get underway, and as we speak the news is coming in literally by the minute of what's going on, and it does appear overnight in the last few hours India has fired missiles across the border into Pakistani territory in what they call Pakistani terror camps in Kashmir. It looks like that Indian jets have fired missiles into Pakistan-controlled Kashmir. And these fighter jets roared over the territory overnight, it looks like, literally over the last few hours. And the sounds of explosions have been heard across the area and near this so-called line of control, the LOC. Now, the Indian government has just issued a statement, I think in the last hour or two, saying that in the early hours of Wednesday morning, a little while ago, the Indian Armed Forces launched what they call Operation Sindoor, hitting terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, from where they claim terrorist attacks against India have been planned and directed. Now, the Indian Army added that no Pakistani military facilities had been targeted, noting that India had demonstrated what they call considerable restraint in selection of targets and method of execution. Now, reports are coming in that 8 people have died, including 2 children, and at least 35 Pakistanis have been injured. That's come from a spokesperson for the Pakistan military. He was speaking to the BBC. Now, the Pakistan Defence Minister Khawaja Asif also claimed the country had shot down at least 5 Indian fighter jets. And in a post on X just a few hours ago, the Indian Army wrote that, in their words, justice is served and Jai Hind, which I suppose translates to victory to India or victory to Hindustan or the Hindu Rashtra ultimately. In the hours that followed, the Indian Army said that Pakistan had fired artillery across the dividing lines in Kashmir in retaliation. And ironically, and here's a huge, dripping with irony or hypocrisy, accusing Pakistan of violating a 2020 ceasefire agreement. So, James, the news is obviously a little bit thin on the ground. It's very hard to work out what is actually going on here, other than very clearly Indian jets have been sent over Kashmir. They have bombed Pakistan-controlled Kashmir territory. What we don't know yet is exactly where those targets are. Were they in Pakistan-controlled J&K, or were they actually over into Pakistan territory itself? We don't know. Now, in response, it turns out that Pakistan has claimed, and depending on the reports that you look at, they have shot down anything between 3 and 5 Indian fighter jets. So this is serious stuff. This isn't just, over the last few days, we've seen a little bit of, let's call it pot shots of the local military firing at each other across that line of control. That small arms fire, that's almost to be expected. We've seen that actually even with the Chinese army over in the north and Ladakhi territory. These things tend to just be little local spats, let's call it. This, though, what's happened overnight is moving into very, very different territory. These are full-scale large-scale military assaults. We've seen Indian jets flying over Pakistan territory and actually launching missiles. Now, India has claimed it's very controlled, it's very targeted, it's very specific targeting against what they call terrorist infrastructure. It's not aimed at what they claim is Pakistan military infrastructure. That would obviously be a very big line in the sand to cross. That probably would lead to full-scale war. They claim it is only against, well, ultimately what is civilian infrastructure, but in fact they're claiming is terrorist infrastructure. So that is the line that India has drawn. Pakistan has said, no, you have crossed the line. We really have the sovereign right to defend Pakistan territory, and they have shot down Indian jets. Where will this lead? We don't know, James, but I have no doubt that the West has taken a huge intake of breath. These are two nuclear-armed powers now on the brink of war, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And here you can see on the screen, I just pulled up the current report by the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And right at the top of the screen there, you can see that Pakistan's Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, condemned Wednesday's airstrikes and said that, and quote here, deceitful enemy has carried out cowardly attacks and that his country would retaliate. According to them, the attacks took place and hit in regions of Kashmir controlled by Pakistan. And they went on to state, Sharif, he did, stating that Pakistan has every right to give a robust response to this act of war imposed by India, and a strong response is indeed being given. So very tough words, Angus, that they are taking this to another level. There's going to be a major response coming back from Pakistan, and it's going to definitely increase the tensions in the region. So yeah, Angus, it looks like the tensions are definitely at a maximum level in the region. We don't know if there's going to be cooler heads to prevail, if anybody's going to have the opportunity or the influence to be able to step in before this becomes a full-blown military action between the two nations.
Yeah, of course, this could really only go one of two ways, and I have no doubt that the full might of Western diplomacy will be wading in very rapidly now, saying, hey guys, let's just calm the situation down, because this does have the potential to explode into a very, very nasty conflict. Of course, Pakistan and India have come to blows in a big way on at least a couple of occasions in the past. Let's hope this is not another full-scale war being launched. Would India really want that? Who knows, James? But I have no doubt that President Trump will have words to say about this, as indeed Mark Carney, James. I believe they have just been meeting, and probably this will be a very, very hot topic of conversation.
Yeah, and we'll have to wait and see what the response is by both the U.S., by Canada, and the world abroad, the world around us, because of the fact that Donald Trump and Mark Carney did meet today, and that will kind of take us into our next story, Angus, that although they did meet, there does not appear to be a whole lot that was resolved within the meetings that's come out. Now, of course, the two are butting heads over the rhetoric of Canada becoming the 51st nation, and at the same time, of course, the need to put an end to the tariff war that's been going on. Now, Mark Carney has obviously taken office as the new Prime Minister of Canada, but he was also very clearly given a mandate by the Canadian people to not back down to Donald Trump, to not back down to international pressures, to take any type of concessions from the U.S. in relation to trade, tariffs, the auto industry, and of course, the 51st state. Now, they did hold a press meeting or a press conference at the Oval Office, and that was somewhat productive, except it just didn't seem to really produce any real fruits of the labor, so to speak, of that meeting. Now, of course, during this time, we've seen other premiers from across Canada coming out, and most vocally, of course, we have Alberta and Ontario on opposing sides of whether or not they think that there's been benefit to Carney meeting with Donald Trump. Now, of course, Danielle Smith of Alberta has also been increasing her own rhetoric and influence, trying to pressure the ability of Alberta to hold a referendum to become the 51st state of the U.S. on their own, or to at least separate from Canada. Now, we could go into great length about the legalities of that and why that cannot happen, because unlike provinces such as British Columbia, who negotiated an entry into the Confederation of Canada, that was not the case for the province of Alberta. It was divided up from the Northwest Territories, and then, of course, there's a lot of Indigenous rights that would take over before Alberta was even able to consider. So it's seen as just a lot of saber rattling by Danielle Smith to really show support for Donald Trump and to really appease her minority voters. And I don't say that as in minority population. I'm saying the minority of the voters in the province that would actually even entertain separating from Canada, because the most people in Alberta wouldn't fall for that anyway or support it. So again, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot that was settled within the White House meetings today. However, we will look forward to see what Mark Carney brings back to the table when he meets with the premiers of the provinces on Wednesday. Again, we'll see if he releases any further information than what was released at the White House today. They even went as far as having a bit of a tit for a tat in the White House on the 51st state issue. But again, Donald Trump says that he will not back down with the tariffs, and there is no deal to be had at this time that would actually lift tariffs or relieve some of the pain that both the U.S. and Canadian economies are feeling at the end of the day due to the tariffs, Angus.
Yes, indeed. And I think this meeting is obviously very significant. I mean, Mark Carney, a lot to prove as the new Premier for Canada. Donald Trump, well, it's just another visit, isn't it? And I think really the real meat of what will come out of this was obviously discussed behind closed doors, and I think that will only filter out in time. But it was very interesting. I did watch the public side of it, the press conference when Mark Carney sat side by side with Donald Trump, and I have to say I laughed because Donald Trump, he just couldn't help himself. He started talking in front of Mark Carney about Canada becoming the 51st state. And I was thinking, what is going on here? What is your game, Donald Trump? Because we talked a lot about this before. Why is Donald Trump pressing this whole issue, which on the face of it just seems absolutely ridiculous? Yeah. But, and you're going to hate me for saying this, James, I suddenly got it. Because he started actually giving a clue as to where his mind was going on all this. He said, look, Canada, he said, there's an awful lot in this for Canada. We can lower your taxes. We can do this. You get a better healthcare system, a cheaper healthcare system, And he started listing off the benefits. He knows what makes people tick. He understands human nature. That is why he's got to where he's got. And he understands that most human beings, and every issue, the first thing that any human being thinks about on any issue is, what's in it for me? And that's what is appealing to the Canadian people. What's in it for me? Cheaper taxes, better healthcare, better this, better that. And of course, I suddenly got what he's doing. He realizes that North America, the continent, is actually better off on its as one united unit. And this is where the 51st state argument, I think, is coming from. He thinks, look, together we will be an enormous force, a powerful force. We'll take in the territory of Canada. We'll just become one united country of whatever you want to call it, North America, whatever. Because, of course, this actually is not unprecedented. Look at the Soviet Union. China has effectively done the same in the past. The European Union is actually going through that same process. There's no real outrage or controversy about any of those. It's just happened almost through slow evolution. What Donald Trump is doing, he's just accelerated that and just actually come out outrageously in the way that he normally does and said, we're going to make you the 51st state. Actually, no, if he'd been a little bit more, I was going to say subtle and Donald Trump don't come in the same sentence. But if he'd been a bit more subtle, this actually would have made a lot more sense, and actually could one day maybe happen. That it actually, when you think about it, James, it isn't quite so outrageous when you think that the whole of North America combined would be a very, very powerful political, national, sovereign force. The unfortunate thing for the Canadians is obviously they would then be absorbed into this as a minority party. But ultimately, it does make sense. As he said, it's just an arbitrary line across the map that somebody drew one day. We're all ultimately the same people. Interesting argument, James.
Well, interesting argument, but, we differ on giving the credit to Donald Trump in terms of any rational thought or plan. So we'll leave that one alone on that end. But I can definitely say that, yeah, the tactic that he is using to try and sell Canadians on becoming the 51st state will never work. And all it has done so far is to create an amazing level of animosity towards the administration of the United States of America, and it's one that I've never seen in my lifetime to really divide our two nations when it comes to that point. So.
Indeed, James, and it's very easy for me as an independent observer to make that comment. If I was Canadian, I'm sure I would have a very differing view, but there you go. And of course, I speak from a seat of hypocrisy when, of course, the European Union, we British rejected the European Union firmly and out of hand. So, of course, I do totally respect Canadian sovereignty. But anyway, on that note, James, let's move on. And Victory in Europe Day, a very, very important day in the calendar, really for the world. That happens tomorrow, May the 8th. And we had huge celebrations. Celebrations is the wrong word, actually. And I think, and in fact, it is a criticism often thrown around these days, that we shouldn't be celebrating anything to do with war. We should be paying tribute to it, and we should certainly be marking these things. But celebration is perhaps the wrong word to use when we talk about conflicts where literally millions of people died. So, certainly here in the UK, we had VE Day. I suppose celebrating the victory and the end of the war, I suppose, is in that sense the appropriate word. But we had a big parade on Monday. We had a public holiday on Monday as part of that. But the Sikh community served massively, made a huge contribution in that conflict of World War II. And of course, we talk about Victory in Europe Day tomorrow, but victory over Japan occurred sometime later, 1946, and people tend to forget about this. And it was a Sikh regiment as part of the British Army that served so nobly against the fight against the Japanese. The Japanese were, there's various words being bandied around about the Japanese, but they were ruthless. They were absolute barbarians in the Second World War. Some of the atrocities that they were responsible for against not just the Allies, but against China. I have friends in China who told me the atrocities that the Japanese got up to leading up to the Second World War. It's quite horrifying. And it was the Sikhs in India, as part of the British Empire, that came up against the Japanese and fought so nobly. And I'm just going to give you, I put it together, a little sort of a rundown of the contribution that the Sikhs made during this major conflict during the 1940s. Now, the information is in the public domain, very limited, unfortunately. There isn't actually a lot of information out there about what Sikhs got up to. One of the key characters in the story is Lieutenant General William Joseph Slim, Bill Slim as he was known. He actually then became Field Marshal Viscount Slim. And he was in charge of the Sikh forces that fought in the 14th Army, as it was called. And it became known as the Forgotten Army because they were so far away in the jungles of Burma that people, obviously here in Europe and North America, were particularly focused on what was going on against the Germans and the Italians here on the continent of Europe. And of course, those fighting out in Burma and in that area became known as the Forgotten Army. And this Burma campaign. And I have a personal connection because my own grandfather was a British officer in the Burma campaign. He was involved in this, and I've no doubt he would have encountered the Sikh regiment. So again, it's very much of personal interest to myself. And it's been very difficult to find information exactly what happened under Lieutenant General Slim's command. Now, there is apparently an authoritative work on the subject, and it was called The Sikh Regiment in the Second World War, written by Colonel Birdwood, and that is very hard to get hold of, so if anybody's got a copy, do let me know. But it's very clear that the 1st Sikh Battalion, also known as the 14th Sikh, also known, and the Ferozpur Sikhs and the King George's Own regiments were there under Slim's command. And it appears as if the famous 2nd Sikh, that was the 15th Ludhiana Regiment, was also there. And as the Allied nations stepped ever closer to this conflict of the Second World War, this time with, of course, the Imperial Japanese, Sikh soldiers once again did step forward, as they always do, as the mainstay of the British Indian Army. And despite the rising voice of dissent by the Indians for independence, which of course was gathering apace at that time, volunteer numbers were not at all affected. The Sikhs stood up, as they always do, and stepped forward. Sikhs, unsurprisingly, still made up a disproportionate quantity of the forces that India gave to the war effort. So, as always, it was per capita the Sikhs who made up the largest portion of the Indian contingent in the British Army. Sikhs fought again on a number of fronts where Sikh units were largely deployed. Now, India entered the war when the Viceroy of India, Lord Linlithgow, without consulting Indian leaders, declared war against Germany on behalf of India. So Lord Linlithgow did declare a war on behalf of India against Germany, and the Indian leaders said, well, don't we have a say in this? So there's a little bit of controversy there. And unsurprisingly, a pretty sharply divided debate ensued, and Indians split along the role that they should play in the war in the West. Now, traditionally, Indian soldiers had played a lead role in Britain's battles up to that point, but a significant number of nationalists disliked Britain taking their support for granted. A call for British commitment to independence was called before they could expect India's cooperation in the war effort. So unsurprising, the independence movement in India at that time then leveraged this situation. Basically, Britain was going to war. So the Indian nationalists thought, we'll take advantage of this situation and we'll leverage this to gain an advantage, saying, if you want us to go to war on your behalf or with you, then we want some leeway on this independence movement. And it came to a culmination when, of course, Mahatma Gandhi, yes, Gandhi, this figure that we talked a lot about, launched the Quit India movement in August 1942. So just when Britain's back was against the wall, it was literally fighting for its very own survival. The Quit India movement, launched by Mahatma Gandhi, basically put a knife to the throat of the British. And, well, from a British perspective, thanks very much for that, just at the time when we're fighting for our survival. From an Indian perspective, yeah, you can understand why India, the independence movement, would take advantage of any situation after what it had endured. So, again, you can argue both sides of the coin on that one. Now, there was widespread violence in many cities across India as the British quelled demonstrations in scenes that would ultimately lead to the end of British rule in India. But states like the Punjab, from where the concentration of recruits into the British Indian Army came, they looked on curiously at these events, primarily that were going on in Delhi. With only voluntary recruitment into the army, young Sikh men helped to swell the Indian Army from 189,000 at the start of the war to 2.5 million at the end of the war. So the Indians did contribute massively, but of course the largest proportion came from the Punjab, the Sikhs. And the Sikhs in the Punjab were to make a concerted demand for independence only after they had quelled the rise of fascism in the West. So the Sikhs, typical of Sikhi, they said, no, we will fight injustice and fascism first, and only then, when we have defeated this dreadful evil, only then will we discuss the discussions about independence and giving us our own sovereignty. So, of course, as always, it comes morality first. It's all about fighting what is right first, and then we will worry about ourselves second. Contrast that with the Indians, Gandhi, who basically said, no, we want independence. If you want us on side, we want independence first, and then we'll worry about fighting fascism. So the Sikhs, they saw the Second World War as a Dharam Yuddha, a war of righteousness. Dharam, of course, a very key word there. And again, I think this speaks volumes about the philosophy of Sikhi and the goodness of Sikhi. Contrast that with the rest of India. Now, a British officer wrote a fascinating book after the Second World War. Major Yates Brown, his name was. He wrote of the Punjab during World War II. He said, bracing cold in winter, staggering heat in summer, and a capricious rainfall that blesses the land or leaves it a desert. Such are the conditions under which 750,000 recruits are born and nurtured. So there we go, James. He has said himself, this is the land, this brutal, cruel land from where the Sikhs are nurtured, where they're born and bred. No wonder they breed them tough in the Punjab. No wonder Sikhs make such great soldiers. Now, during the war, 300,000 Sikhs served in the army, almost every single one of them to a man in combatant arms. So they were frontline soldiers. They were some of the best soldiers in the British Army. Now, Indians that secretly supported the Germans on the maxim of my enemy's enemy is my friend. In other words, many Indians took the side of the Germans because they said, we don't like the British, therefore we will side by default with the Germans. Well, they got a bit of a rude wake-up call because on the 7th of December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Air Force attacked Pearl Harbor. Thus, Japan entered the war on the side of the Germans. So suddenly, the Japanese entered the war. They, of course, then, that theatre in Southeast Asia, the Japanese started rolling towards India. So the Indians got a bit of a shock when they sided with Germany. Suddenly, the Japanese, who also were on the side of the Germany, were marching towards India. And those Indians who fought against the British or sided against the British suddenly found themselves, oh dear, we're in a bit of a spot here. Who came to the rescue? Well, the Sikhs did once again. So, the Japanese, they essentially dominated Southeast Asia. They drove the colonial armies of the Dutch, French and English out of Hong Kong, French Indochina as it was then, the Philippines, Thailand and Burma, which is present-day Myanmar, down to Singapore. So the Japanese swept across Southeast Asia. Who got in the way? The 11th Sikh Regiment. And they were to play a massive part to rout Japan from Southeast Asia. And ironically, it was the Sikhs who fought with the British in the Anglo-Burmese Wars of 1852 and 1886 and helped the British annex Burma to the British Empire. Now, as the Second World War kicked off, Sikhs had fought with the British in the mountains of Afghanistan, the deserts of Mesopotamia, the dreadful carnage in the trenches of Flanders. But by 1944, Sikh soldiers were well entrenched in the sweltering swamps of the Burmese jungles. Now, the Japanese, who were, of course, just by nature and their own training, were better suited for that sort of theatre of war. They were very much at home in those sweltering swamps of Burma. Now, the Japanese had pushed through Burma. By May 1944, they had pushed their forces to the eastern edges of India itself, and they were ready to roll their troops forward into the plains of India and west towards Calcutta. So there they were, poised, ready to pour into India and take control of India. Now they came up against the Sikhs in Kohima, in Assam, in northeastern India. It led to what was known as the Battle of Kohima. The 4th Battalion of the 15th Punjabi Regiment came up against the Japanese. They were experienced and they were resolute, and they came up against these almost suicidal methods of attack by the Japanese. Now, the Battle of Kohima ended up being the turning point of the Japanese, what was called the Yugo Offensive into India, this Japanese drive into India. The Battle of Kohima was when the British and the Sikhs fought against Japan at the Battle of Kohima, and they stopped the Japanese in their tracks in 1944. It took place, this battle, in 3 stages between the 4th of April to the 22nd of June 1944, around, of course, the town of Kohima, which is now the capital city of Nagaland in northeastern India. Interestingly, a recent poll conducted by the British National Army Museum voted the battles of Kohima and Imphal as Britain's greatest battles. They were heroic battles. This is where the Sikhs once again fought heroically. They stamped their name once again in history as being some of the greatest, most heroic troops to ever take the battlefield. And the battles of Kohima and Imphal have been referred to as the Stalingrad of the East. For those who know the history of the Second World War, Stalingrad was one of the most dreadful, most awful wars of attrition in Europe. And Kohima and Imphal were similar styles of battle over a series of months. And in fact, today, in the Kohima cemetery, amongst the 1,378 grave markers, is the famous Kohima Memorial. So I'm getting a bit emotional here because this is something that my grandfather, who died a few years ago, he used to say to me on a regular basis. He used to say, when you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today. Sorry, I do always get very emotional about this because the Burma Star Association, they, even today in Britain, they hold an annual marking ceremony where they say those very words. And my grandfather used to do that every year. And they marked this very battle where British soldiers and Sikh soldiers stood side by side to fight that battle. Now, during this campaign, there were various Victoria Crosses. This is the highest Medal of Honour awarded to British soldiers. And Sikhs were, of course, there. Jan Singh, for example, was awarded the VC, the Victoria Cross, in 1945, pinned on his breast by King George VI. His conduct was unquestionably in the finest traditions of the 15th Punjab Regiment. 16 days later, after his remarkable act of bravery, Lieutenant Karanjit Singh Judge of the 4th Battalion eliminated 10 enemy bunkers, and he was mortally wounded while attacking a nest of 3 more. And of course, many of these VCs were awarded posthumously. In other words, those soldiers died in their acts of bravery. And he was to become the 3rd member of the 4th Battalion to be awarded the Victoria Cross. And by the end of the war, 2 more VCs were to be awarded to Sikh soldiers, including Parkash Singh, in 3 separate actions, each an action worthy of the title of supreme gallantry. He rescued stranded vehicles under intense fire. And again in Burma, Nan Singh of the famed 1st Sikh Battalion was fittingly awarded the VC after leading an attack on heavily armed Japanese trenches on a knife-edged hill. And he single-handedly cleared and captured 3 enemy trenches, which allowed the rest of the unit to forge forward to gain an unanticipated victory. Now, I'm going to close this with the words of Major Yates Brown, who wrote this book about the Sikhs fighting in World War II. And he said the following words: I have never met a despondent Sikh in the front line. In a hospital in the rear, he will moan dreadfully over a small wound, but in a fight, he will go on to his last breath and die laughing at the thought of paradise, with the battle cry of Khalsa Ji Ki Jai as he falls. This very cry, a friend told me, came over a field telephone in the Arakan when a Sikh signal Havildar had been cut off beyond hope of rescue. The line remained alive. The Havildar described to my friend how the Japanese were creeping up. A pause, then he came back to say that he had killed a skirmisher, but that now his ammunition was exhausted. There's not much time, Sahib. I'll break the telephone before they get me. Victory to the Holy Brotherhood. They found him dead beside an enemy he had brained with the butt of his Sten gun. A remarkable people, the Sikhs, with their 10 prophets, 5 distinguishing marks, and their baptismal rite of water stirred with steel. A people who have made history and will make it again. Every man in this magnificent battalion of the Indian State Forces, the 1st Battalion Regiment, stands 5'11" or over. They are the finest lot of Sikhs I have ever seen, and that is saying much. Every officer in his battalion is a Sikh. In discipline, turnout and fighting efficiency, the 1st Patialas have earned the unstinted admiration of all their comrades in the division. So there you go, James. I think it is without doubt that Sikhs have fought with huge heroism I think their name stands in history. Their contribution in World War II, as indeed in all other conflicts, is absolutely outstanding and is a real testament to the Sikh community, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And I mean, there's a lot to be said when you look at, first through the door and last to rise out of the rubble. And I think that is really a true testament as well to the Sikh fighters who were there to lead the way, to lead the bravery and the resiliency and just the commitment. But they didn't just turn and run when it got tough. They stayed to the bitter end to make sure that they got to accomplish the goals that they had set forth, and they were willing to do that at any cost. And for like a phoenix to rise out of the ashes of the burned or the fire, so forth as the different sayings go. It is really why in recent shows we've also touched on the fact of, the loss of the Sikh regiments, the dedicated Sikh regiments that have historically been there in the different armies and military areas throughout the world. So again, they played such a vital role that I think a lot of times is overshadowed by the non-Sikh fighters and soldiers. So just an amazing report there, Angus. And of course, with your personal connection through your grandfather, it is not to be overstated the value of each and every life, including that of your grandfather, for those who fought and really gave everything that they had, and some of them even up to the end of their own life and ability to give. But the sacrifice is not something that we've heard people complain about. Instead, it's a badge of honor that they fight for their nation. They fought for other nations to be free and to rise up against the tyranny of the evil forces of the day, as we continue to see the Sikh community do, in whether it is the terroristic attacks or acts of nature and disasters and war zones that are a world away from their own land, away from their own homes, such as in Ukraine and different regions such as that. You see the Sikhs standing tall, you see them proud. Again, first through the door, last to rise out of the rubble, Angus.
Absolutely right. And yes, apologies for getting a little bit emotional there, but of course I do remember my grandfather actually reciting those very same words. When you go home, tell them us and say, for your tomorrow we gave our today. So yeah, very, very personal connection I have to that. And as I say, the Sikh community have a lot to be very proud about of their contribution to that huge war effort fighting against fascism. Right, James, let's move on now to our comments section, and loads of comments as always. Thank you very much to our wonderful audience for your contributions to the comment sections. And we'll start off today with Avtar Dhillon and talking about Amrit Pal Singh. Yes, poor Amrit Pal Singh, sadly residing still in Dibrugarh jail, but he has fought the good fight in his own particular way. And as you say, Avtar Dhillon, I bet Mr. Modi is not happy with Amrit Pal Singh, but they'll no doubt try and cook something up. Yes, indeed. And in fact, I think Amrit Pal Singh and all, of course, let's not forget all his colleagues who are in the same situation. They are concerned, and they did actually apply to be relocated back to the Punjab. Of course, they're over in the opposite side of India. They're in Assam, in Dibrugarh jail, but they did ask to be relocated to jail in the Punjab, primarily because they were afraid for their lives, basically, James. And again, this doesn't really say a lot for how the rule of law is being rolled out in India. If prisoners, political prisoners, after all, that is what Amrit Pal Singh is, if political prisoners are literally fearing for their lives in jails.
Yeah, and of course, this is not something new to us in terms of Modi cooking something up. But again, we've got to really watch. And that's where recent reports that we kind of pushed aside that we were going to cover tonight from Amnesty International has really raised the alarms on this as well. So we'll cover that in coming shows of the next few days. But of course, we had to take a look at the escalating violence between India and Pakistan and the new turn of events there. So we'll look at that a bit further in the context of international watch organizations also watching how Modi plays his hand here.
Yeah, and the next comment from Punjab says, well, this is interesting that with what's happened overnight. Modi and Shah will not go to war. Modi knows if he goes to war, India will break. He's even more scared now that when he heard that Sikhs will not fight with Pakistan. Well, events obviously taken over this situation. Well, is Modi afraid to go to war? It clearly appears he's not afraid to go to war. But as I've said, James, I think, and we talk about catalytic events. Who knows where this could lead? And as I said, there is this sort of possible future line where maybe if this conflict really does explode, that maybe, as in the case of after so many major conflicts, as the chips fall at the end of it and as the dust settles, strange what's the word I'm looking for? Relaying of the geography can happen. In other words, it's not impossible that the United Nations may step in and say, look, the only solution to this going forward to prevent you two nations going to nuclear conflict is to have a buffer zone, which by default, James, is Khalistan.
Yeah, it very well could, Angus. It's really with again, we've seen that now Modi obviously is not afraid to respond with a military action, but it very well could have a big impact on the balkanization of India and the breakup. So it's going to be very important to watch how this plays out.
Yeah, and I think the word really I was looking for was redrawing the map, because of course after every major conflict the map is usually redrawn with new boundaries, and there we go. That is what we're after. We are looking at redrawing the map down that line between Pakistan and India. That's what we're looking for. So
that's right.
TC, yes, thank you, TC. And it was actually, I talked about Bob Blackman standing up in Parliament, the British Parliament, a couple of days ago on behalf, effectively, of the RSS and Hindutva, demanding that the British government, condemn Pakistan for its promotion of territory. Thank you. It was TC who pointed me in the direction of that Bob Blackman speech. And as you rightly say here, TC, listening to Mr. Blackman is a poor reflection of how misinformation can be used in Parliament. And now your point here, and this I guess is probably the same in Canada, James, and I've no doubt in the US Senate, is that there is a level of immunity in Parliament, in that an MP can stand up and basically within limits, they can make all sorts of accusations and make all sorts of statements that don't have to be backed up by evidence or law. And you cannot be sued for slander. If you stand up in Parliament, make an accusation against somebody, if you said that in public, and that can be provably wrong what you stated, you can be sued legally. But if you say it in Parliament as an MP, you have what's called parliamentary privilege, as TC says, and you cannot be sued for it. So Bob Blackman can stand up and he can say anything he wants within reason, and cannot be sued for it. And as TC says, look, this is a loophole that needs to be reviewed. They shouldn't be allowed to get away with this. And we have to say we've had certain situations in the past where MPs have made all sorts of slanderous allegations and accusations against other MPs, but of course they know they can't be sued about it. But of course the newspapers, the media are watching, it's recorded, so that misinformation, as indeed Mr. Blackman's was, this misinformation can be reported without being confronted without being confronted with the truth, without being saying this isn't true. These accusations can be stated publicly, James.
Yeah, exactly, Angus, and well stated there. It is just a strong. It's a strong accusation to make for slander and different issues like that. But again, they get that protection within the Parliament, and that's the same in Canada. But at the same time, I think that it also has played into why there's an example very clear here of why Pierre Poilievre didn't get a security clearance, because he could throw false accusations in the Parliament against other parliamentarians, including Justin Trudeau and the Liberals and such. But he could throw those accusations because he didn't get read in on the national security dossiers and the world politics when it came to the threats, because he didn't have the security clearance. So again, he could turn around and make lies and false accusations, but he was protected by that blanket protection there. Whereas had he have actually had security clearance, it would have restricted what lies he could tell in the Parliament. So it's a very complicated and convoluted issue, Angus, but at the end of the day, yeah, there's got to be a level of certain integrity that we expect of our politicians. And again, it just shows our unrealistic expectations of politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we don't need to talk more about our opinion of politicians. Right, Amakaira, this talks about the film industry. Yes, James, and of course you covered that newly released film, Guru Nanak Jahai, that was released recently. And Amakaira says, look, the Indian film certification don't seem to have a problem with stories where the British colonial rule is the enemy because Indians are not to blame. They're always very happy to pass films that condemn British colonial rule. But when it comes to other stories where India are to blame, they're not quite so loose in their certification. And as evidence, Amakaira points to the 2021 film Vivki Kaushal Sada Udam. That was the story, of course, of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, which, of course, the British were the baddies in that film. So again, no problem about that film. 2025, the recent film Jippy Grewal Akal, based around the time after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Now, this one did get a backlash from part of the Sikh community because it wasn't portrayed as accurately as it should have been. And of course, that refers back to the Sikh Empire days. And then the 2022 film, the Diljit Dosanjh film Joggi, based during the time of the 1984 genocide. A great film, as you say, but they played it safe because it was a fictional character. They portrayed the violence ordered by just a couple of high-ranking officers. And at the end of the day, they depicted the Indian army restoring order, saving Joggi's community. So again, it was a completely Indian government spin on the dreadful events of the genocide. Basically, the Indians were the good guys, the Hindus were the good guys in that version of the genocide, bizarrely. And then, of course, Diljit Dosanjh's Punjab 95, which was this true story of Jaswant Singh Kalra, this heroic figure from the Punjab, who was ultimately murdered himself extrajudicially by the Indian state. He was the one who was airing evidence, he was bringing evidence to the wider world about the dreadful murders, the genocides of young Sikhs during the 80s and 90s. And that film, of course, was banned by the Indian censors, as we well know, James. So it's one rule for one and one rule for others in India, James, on the certification board.
Well, and I think that also something that's important to realize is that with this particular movie, it is not so much about well, of course, it is about the colonization and the different things that happened, but I think it was more looking at the historical context of Canada, the way that they treated potential new immigrants and those who had traveled to our land who should have been based on the freedom of travel within the British colonies to arrive in Canada and be welcomed. Instead, they weren't. And that was more due to systemic racism and really policies that put many lives at risk, not only the Sikhs, but I mean, look at the fact that it was a Japanese ship, that there was an Asian head tax and a Chinese head tax, and that on arrivals for those who were allowed to stay, but even then, most were sent back. And where it really is an important part of Canadian history and the in the colonization era was that it really stirred change to not only the immigration system and the allowance for people to come back to Canada from India, but also other parts of the world, and to lift some of the restrictive direct access travel policies that were there in the day, Angus.
And then on to our final comments. Harman Rai says, I think what you meant was keep it up, guys. Keep up, guys. This is actually quite a different thing, but it did make me laugh, this one, James. We're trying our best to keep up, are we not?
That's right.
And then Happy signs us off with, thanks guys, never stop telling and sharing the truth. Well, James, that is what we're here for. We will, as long as a great way Guru allows us, we will continue to tell the truth and sharing the truth. Satellite TV News will hopefully keep rolling on until that great day that Khalistan is enabled and established, and from then on it becomes the Khalistan Broadcasting Corporation.
I know, right? And all this fat guy can keep thinking about is the lunches at the cafes in Khalistan, because people keep talking about it and making me think about it. So let's make it happen soon so that we can get over there, start reporting from the Khalistan Broadcasting Corporation, and enjoy some amazing meals with our Sikh friends.
Indeed, very much looking forward to that day. And as events unfold between Pakistan and India, who knows where those chips will lie over the coming months. But of course, we will be there reporting as they do, and looking forward to the outcome of that if it does involve Khalistan. But anyway, that is it for Perspectives for another day. Please don't forget to keep those comments coming in, as they have been by their thousands. So thank you for our wonderful audience for your contributions. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satloadstv.com if there's anything you'd like to bring to our attention directly that you don't want to put in the public domain. But that is it for another day. Thank you so much for watching once again. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.